Hello, hello, hello. All right, it's 11 on the dot, and we have three exciting presentations today. Well, the first one I don't know if it's that exciting because it's mine, but I know the next ones are going to be great. And yeah, in honor of time, let's get going to this presentation about optimizing visuals for single source publishing. And what all that means, well, you'll hopefully know by the end of this session. First up, hello. I'm Anton Bollen. I'm the European Customer and Market Strategist. I work for a company called TechSmith. It's an American company that's located in Michigan, USA, right up near Detroit and Chicago, along the Canadian border. We have about 250 employees over there, and myself in Europe. And our main products, Snagit and Camtasia, maybe you know them. They are localized in right now 4 languages and sold in, last time I checked, 194 countries. That's less important. What's more important is, well, my background a little bit. I used to be an instructional designer, creating e-learning content, training content, video of all sorts. And one of my jobs before, now being more in a strategic marketing role, was video localization. And video localization was also my first touch point, actually, with Gala, because back in 2017, Gala allowed me to speak at their forum at the TECOM conference in Stuttgart about video localization, and that was really cool and a great experience to talk to so many people about, well, all my pain points and problems I had trying to figure out video localization about 7 or 8 years ago. And then just 6 months ago, I was allowed to come back to talk more about content localization strategies. So my first talk being a little bit more about my first role, my instructional design background, the second talk being a little bit more focused on my current work. And what was really cool, I'm sure you've seen these like sketch notes, these people that draw posters of your presentation. Gala actually had someone there, and they drew a poster of my presentation that now hangs in my office. I'm really happy about it. It's a great conversation starter. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of Gala, even though this is my first time at a real Gala conference where I'm not part of the... What was that? All right, apparently not related to us up here. So, so I'm really happy to be back this time at the real Gala conference here in Munich to talk to you about optimizing visuals for single source publishing. But first, I need you guys to put your hands up in the air because I need to figure out who you actually are. I think it's always interesting to know who I'm talking to and who I'm talking with. And so, if you are like me more on the client side of things, please raise your hand. If you're, yeah? Okay, 4 or 5 people, cool. And if you're a language service provider on that side of things, raise your hand. Okay, so I'm gonna say that's about 75 to 25%. That's pretty cool. And then if you right now regularly are creating images or visuals as part of your job, or your team is creating them, please raise your hand. I would imagine that's most of you, a fair amount. And then how many of you are in some aspect involved in the localization of this content? Okay, so it sounds to me that everybody in this room at some point right now already has touch points with visuals. I mean, otherwise you probably wouldn't be sitting here, right? And so, optimizing visuals for single source publishing. The goal of my presentation is to provide all of you some guiding design principles and theme that you can apply to your own work and your own content strategy, visual content strategy. And a second ago I asked who is on the creation side or on the client side of things. It's very clear that this is important for you to figure out how you can use visuals in your content strategy. But I think it's also really something really important for language. My company, we've been working with 2 different language service providers over the last couple of years, and honestly, we've grown a lot by working with them and through the guidance they were able to give us. They didn't just give us translated code and translated text, they helped us shape the way we're doing localization. So I'm hoping that a lot of the themes and principles from today's little talk is something that you as an LSP can also take to your clients when you're talking to them and you're advising them on what content to localize and how and when and where and why. Yeah, visuals, images, videos, there are many factors that actually affect how we're localizing them. And yeah, so what I always try to think about is, what is the type of visual? What is its purpose? Is it marketing, or is it more help file? Is it active, meaning I'm trying to use this image or this visual to reach new audiences? Or is it more reactive, where I'm just trying to help someone out who might be having a problem or struggling or contacting me? There's many other factors, right? Your audience, your culture, the target language you're going forward, the market, but also things like the shelf life. Is this content only going to live for a week, a month, a day, or is it something that's potentially live for a year or even longer? But then, of course, how much of it is all there, and at the end of the day, money, right? How much money do you really have? And one thing, just kind of sidestep, what I like to do at my company when it comes to figuring out what content to localize in which way, I try to prioritize it because not all content is created equal. And what I like as a little exercise, what I like to do is I create a matrix and I do an audit of everything we have, from blog posts to help articles to videos to animations to printed PDFs, and I dot them out with the help of my colleagues, because this can give us a high-level overview of what type of content you have, how much of it you have, and how important it might be. So on the low volume side of things, right? We often have things that are on our website, our brand, that are related to customer acquisition. They're really important. That's what at the end of the day brings us money. Yeah, but there's not that much of it. But then on the flip side, we have a ton of documentation, we have a ton of support files, we have a bunch of help. There's a lot of it. It's slightly less important. It's still important, but it's not as important as, let's say, my marketing video that goes on my homepage. And then you have many, many things in between. And this is, of course, very simplified right now. You can make these exercises or these kind of matrices rather complex, and there's other approaches for it as well. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about single source publishing. And the definition of single source publishing is a content management method which allows for the same piece of source content to be reused across different formats of media and deliverables, which can be language and otherwise. So another way of thinking about it, right here we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Those are different pieces of content. They could be text, they could be visuals. And through some authoring tools, some view generator, this could be FrameMaker, this could just be really a DIY, some DIY solution, right? You're compiling that information for different outputs. There could be different views, there could be for different devices, there could be, but they can also be, for example, if you take a look at this, can be, in my world, a lot of things happen online, so I might want some pieces of content, a little snippet to be reused in marketing, but maybe in a blog post, but also in the help file. And if you have a smart way of managing and distributing them, you can reuse them, and that, of course, helps us. And that essentially is the definition of single source publishing. And for Gala and for us here in the room, right, I think it's more interesting when we think about single source publishing less in terms of different devices or different websites, but languages, right? That's why we're all here. And so that's why I want to talk to you. That's what I want to talk to you right now. So the traditional approach for publishing or creating content, at least in my world, the way we've been doing is we create our text in various languages, we create our images, and then we compile them. But essentially, we are recreating it, we're recreating the visuals for every single language we have to support. And that's fine if you're maybe only doing 1 or 2 languages. But as you're starting to scale and you're adding more languages, it gets very costly and it gets very, very time consuming. Yeah? Especially once you start, images are okay, videos are much worse, right? Because not only do you have to create the image, you have to recreate it and localize it, you're adding additional review cycles, and then anytime you have to manage that content, you have to update it, you have to change things out, that effort just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies, and that's killing your scalability. And yeah, at the end of the day, that's time and money my company or we all would rather be spending creating other and different content. So this is a real problem, and I think single source publishing can be a good solution for that, because if we take a look at the diagram I just showed, if we can avoid having to create multiple versions of essentially the same identical image or visual, right? That means we only have one piece of content that we can apply across the board. Text is still text, but I think we're all pretty good at working with text nowadays. But one image or one piece of visual to rule them all, that's ideally what we'd like to do. So how can we get there? Yeah, first up, multilingual visuals. There are some challenges, of course. And one thing to consider, and I don't think this is new to anyone here, are the different cultural norms. What kind of symbolism are you using within the images? Can you actually use the same image in the German market that you might use in the American market or the Chinese market? Things like body language, emotions, the type of business attire, that's perfect for your audience. That's hopefully nothing new to you. I have seen so many blog posts that deal exactly with all the mess-ups that other companies have done. There's so many examples from IKEA to Pepsi where they didn't take the cultural norms into consideration and tried to push something out, and that failed. So I'm not going to go into that too much further. But the one I really want to focus on a lot is text, because a lot of the visuals and graphics we create contain text. And if you think about language, that would be the one part that makes it harder to distribute that out to your various audiences, right? Because you're trying to deal with an international audience. And then what's up with the iceberg? Right? This ties a little bit back more to the cultural norms. There's the observable stuff, what we're kind of perceiving, especially as naive Westerners when it comes to the rest of the world. But there's so much more to the way images and visuals are being interpreted and perceived, and how it really determines their effectiveness. So keep that in mind as well. Yeah, but let's go on talking a little bit more about text. So my background, of course, is a lot in high-tech, screenshots, images, those kind of things, software documentation. And one thing a lot of companies do, right? You just use the English source visuals. Don't bother localizing, because that's one image that you can use for all your instances. So Evernote does that quite frequently. We also do it, even though our software is localized. We keep in our help file, we keep our images in English. And this goes back a little bit to that matrix we had earlier. How important is my content? It's in the help file. It's a little bit less important. So we made a conscious decision in our help file to keep using our English images to speed up our production workflow and use that time and money more wisely towards other aspects and other pieces of visuals. Yeah? And for the user, this is where reactive content, right? They're having a problem, they're going to our help file, they're looking it up, they're hopefully figuring out where that sync captions button is, and they're back at work or back at being productive. So there is some impact on the customer or the user, but I think it's minimal and it's justifiable in many, many situations. Keep, as I said earlier, language or culture in mind as well. Maybe in the French market, you might want to localize. So that's something you kind of have to see and maybe do some auditing or even some surveying of your target audience, or talk to your LSP who knows a lot more about that market than you or I likely would, right? But speaking of French, right, you can also take a mixed approach. So this is on Zara.com, right? Their homepage. And what's key when you go to their website is, of course, the different shopping categories, the search option, the ability to connect and log into your profile. And this is content that's actually, or the text is not part of the image itself. And as a result, they were able to localize it because that's what really drives the experience here. But if you look at the middle, it's a little bit hard to see, but it says, join live recycled, right? That is on-screen text that's baked into this visual, and Zara made the conscious decision to keep the image itself in English, in the original, without any localization, because they're able to provide enough localized experience all around it to keep their customers happy and essentially drive their customers really to the shopping options on the left side. But the benefit for them is one image they can use on all instances of their Zara website, so they're not having to recreate this image for every single one of them. So another approach I've seen quite a bit in the wild is the following, right? So if you're taking a screenshot and the instructions in this case are, you're trying to extend the clip by dragging it to the left and the right. If you take a look at it, there is a lot of, again, text, right? That thing that we don't really like. There's a lot of unnecessary text that's distracting. It's actually creating a more German experience over here, but for the user who's really needing to learn, take this and drag it out, right? It's not really necessary. So by simply trimming and doing some very light mock-up and changing of things in photoshopping, right, you can reduce that same screenshot to this, and the main instructions are still there. Take the clip, drag it to the right and left to extend it, and as a little tip, or generally best practice if you're thinking about it, we still have to provide the user some context of where they are in the software or why it's relevant, right? So we kept the timeline, we kept the main iconic buttons visible, but we got rid of the text, we got rid of the text, we got rid of, well, all the text on the screen. That would have created a more localized experience. We removed that to create a more international or multilingual experience. And that works really, really well. And again, one image that then we can redistribute, only one image we have to update, only one image that we need to host on our servers, that's another one as well. So what if you actually do need some text as part of your instructions? And what I try to live by is to put as little text actually on the image itself, but rather put it outside of the image if I can. So I'm a big fan of numbers and labels, right? Because I can have my image, I'm trying to explain something right here, and then by simply having a table, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I can provide the relevant instructions. And one graphic in English, but I can use that same graphic in French, and of course, guess what? In German as well, right? And if you had more languages, it would scale to that really nicely as well, because we wouldn't have to necessarily recreate the image in 4 or 5 or 10 target languages, but one image to rule them all. And also the benefit, I can't stress this enough, updating content. Our instructional designers are spending a lot of time updating our content, and that's not time well spent. They'd rather be creating better new content. So if there is an update, let's say there's a big massive new button showing up that needs to be in there, they can go in our system, upload one new screenshot, hit publish, and then it goes out to our 4 or 5 destination languages in a single move. Huh? 5? Perfect. Okay, so taking this concept to the next stage, right? Or same approach. Another image, this is the bad example because we have the text on here. If we simply use labels instead, same effect, right? This is not necessarily new, but something to keep in mind, and this is one way to keep your images optimized for that. Here's another approach I want to show you guys, because this has been getting a lot of attention lately, and it's called simplify. Yeah? Have you seen graphics like this lately in your email, in your marketing websites? These kind of like simplified, abstracted markups, right? I even saw one yesterday walking around downstairs. EasyLink, they have a booth down there, and I noticed on their digital signage on their TV, they were having a lot of graphics that looked like software, but they were rather abstract. And I've been doing a lot of research around that and working with our instructional designers, and there wasn't a good name for it, so we just call it simplified user interface, because you need a name to talk about it, otherwise it's really hard to talk about it. And in a way, it's a representation of an interface, right, that focuses on the essentials by taking away or stripping away the temporarily or contextually unimportant elements. In other words, you take something like this and you turn it into something like this. Yeah? As long as the user is familiar with the original, they can usually figure out what this is really about. And let me show you why this is perfect for single source publishing. Yeah? It's used in classic instructions where you have a classic screenshot, you simplify it. It has advantages because it's easier for the user to follow. They know they have to click on file, connect mobile device. They're not just getting distracted by all these options. But this is still, well, not text heavy, but it still contains text. So the question is, do we even need text when we're using this kind of design principle, design treatment, or can we live completely without text? So let me ask Google, can we do that? Google thinks so, because a lot of their help file, they're using simplified images to explain concepts and give basic instructions, and they're using the same graphic in every single instance. Rather than relying on traditional screenshots, that's the way they're doing it. Let's ask someone else. What about Microsoft? Right? Microsoft Edge, they have this great onboarding center, and it contains 50 graphics and 30 animations. And each animation is completely neutral of language. The text that explains the actions is set to the side or below, and yeah, believe it or not, it's used in every single version of the onboarding center, and that's about, got it. Right, and that is in French, German, English, Spanish, Portuguese, and so on. So one image, and it can scale to many languages. One more look, Adobe, right? This is another really cool example because it has another aspect as well, right? They created these little animations, they're simplified, no text, and they're using it in at least different versions of their language, and because it looks pretty good, I've seen them use it in both their technical content and their marketing content. So again, they're using one graphic and they're using it in multiple places. They're publishing it to different destinations. So there are benefits and advantages to this. Super quick. I now have like 1 minute left, but that's no problem. We'll hit that. Right? It's great for international content, but the effort of creating these graphics is a little bit more. Right? So you kind of have to weigh off how important is that content, what is the shelf life to justify whether or not you're using it. So, oh, forgot about video. That's fine. Very quick, because I'm sure you know a lot about captions, because for single source publishing, video is quite complex. It's a bit hard to just make one video for all. So your secret weapon really in that regard is captions. And there's a couple great caption vendors out there that will teach you more about it. But the benefit of captions is that a single video, as long as it ships with multi-caption files, that single video that supports captions multi-languages, can be used in a system where you have one video and you're distributing out to each language that you need to support. And the same principles we mentioned before: respect cultural norms, try to reduce or remove unnecessary text, and even using SUI animations as we just saw, they all help and optimize content and visuals in a way that you can have one instance of a visual and use it for multiple languages. So in summary, what we just said, right? Think a little bit about the type of content and its purpose to see how far you can simplify it or reduce it. Maybe English is just fine. Remove unnecessary text, right? If you do need text, try to have it live outside of the images. And yeah, as I said, that simplify thing is getting a lot of attention lately. Check it out. And if you're working with video, I think captions are your secret weapon or your best friend. So with that, I'm hopefully not too far over, and I'm ready for your questions as well as your answers. Thank you.
So now we know how to keep things simplified. But before we move to the questions and answers to Anton, I have a favor to ask you. Would you please sign into this session so that we get a head count who was interested in that, and so that you also get the ability to leave feedback. That's really important. So questions for Anton. There must be questions. Yeah, okay. No, we're recording, so it's better if we all hear you.
So first of all, thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation. One question that came to my mind was like the simplified user interface. Are there any tools, or do you just use, or would you just use the graphic artists and their Photoshops or whatever to create it? Or how, like, is there any easy way of creating this?
Yeah, there is two easy ways because it's a new trend. So there's one tool. One tool is actually my company. We make one. It's called Snagit. We have a simplification tool built in. You push a button and it'll simplify a lot of your screen elements. If that interests you, come talk to me. I purposely did not bring this up in the session because I wanted to stay neutral. There's another service I just found the other day that also starts to specialize in that. So in some way, to answer your question, there are ways to automate it to a certain extent. If you're really going for high quality graphics that might go on your marketing website, you might have to do a little bit of a hybrid between high-end visual tools, some automation. But I think the takeaway a little bit here is consider the initial effort and the eventual payout, right? You can create one graphic, but then you might be able to scale that out or scale that graphic in many ways. And yeah, you'll have to do some math or some thinking about it. But there are definitely tools that make your life easier in that regard. So if that interests you, come talk to me.
All right, other questions, comments? Well, I had one, Anton. So when you talk about simplifying the UI, right, you talked about stripping away unessential information that might be distracting. But isn't that a cultural thing? What is important in a visual and what is not? Don't we have cultural interpretations and expectations of visuals?
That is a wonderful question. I don't know the exact answer. It probably depends on the culture you're trying to reach, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some cultures or some audiences that don't fare well with Simplify. I've seen some older people struggle with it, like our VP of Finance. He couldn't figure out the instructions when he saw simplified versions, while the marketing team, they had no problems working with it. Yeah, I think it's a little bit too early to really know if Simplify is all the potential and challenges of Simplify, but yeah, if you have ideas or input on that, let's talk. I'd love to hear more about it because, yeah, I've only been having these Simplify conversations for like a year now with users, and we're going a long way. One thing I can say, we've been running some eye tracking testing on simplified graphics to see if they're actually helping people perform better, and the first indications are yes, they are less distracting and people are able to actually focus on the instructions a little bit better, and I'm hoping to have the actual research later this year. With the help of my colleagues, of course. It's not just me.
Mm-hmm. And then another thing I thought about, we all assemble IKEA furniture at some points in our lives, and no matter in which country we live, and I guess the phase in our lives when we're doing that is different country per country. But You were showing us also the sheet with the instructions, like you just put the numbers and then the end user has to refer to somewhere else on the page, and that is mental effort. So we're gaining a much smoother localization process from it, but are we also gaining the same end user satisfaction?
I would say no.
Oh.
From an end user perspective, I want all my content, all my instructions perfectly localized and adhering to my cultural expectations. But the reality is, for a company, we can't necessarily do that. And then I take a step back as a user, and I'd rather have IKEA focus on building better furniture than making the most optimal instructions they can possibly create.
And at least then the terms on that relate to the numbers are correct.
Exactly. Spend more time maybe than on Q&A rather than recreating the wheel for every single market.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other comments or questions, folks? No? All right, well then, thank you so much, Anton. And we're going to give you a second break, just a couple of minutes maybe, to let new people in, and if you are heading to another session, please do so now, and then we're going to continue with Steve.